I finished shooting my scene. The cameras are over there. They're 40 yards away. They're shut down. And then all of a sudden I just hear this grunting coming from the tree. And for the life of me, it sounded like you would hear a gorilla in the Congo do. Deep bellowing grunt. And remember, this is Alaska, and I'm talking about something that sounded like a silverback gorilla.
So Port Chatham was a small fishing village on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. It was founded in the early 1900s, and by 1950 it was abandoned.
You typically hear about, a typical Northern Californian Sasquatch that, scares people off by throwing some rocks. You don't hear about legends of Bigfoot actually killing people. I mean, that was really scary. He said that they moved the whole ancient village one bay over to get away from the creatures.
I started scanning and I saw something, it looked like Donkey Kong. It had like a conical head, wide shoulders, kind of tapered down, and its arms were moving up and down like this. And, I'm looking at it through the thermal. We're there to look for Bigfoot.
But in your mind, you're just like, I think that was one of those creatures that everybody calls Bigfoot, sort of thing.
Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. At 200 miles long and 100 miles wide, this majestic and rugged region of the last frontier is filled with natural wonders and wildlife galore. In some ways, the peninsula is a microcosm of Alaska itself, encapsulating its true spirit.
The Kenai Peninsula is described as Alaska's playground. If I had to give it a description, I'd say it's a lot crammed into a small package. You've got mountains, you've got rainforests, you've got glacier fields, you've got tundra, you've got, just all kinds of different environments crammed into this little peninsula. You've got hundreds of thousands of acres that are protected in the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. You've got moose. There's been a couple of record-sized bear killed on the peninsula. There's a lot of large animals here. It's certainly capable of sustaining large animals, and it's more animals than people, I would say. Also, there's only 4 or 5 cities on the peninsula that are of any significant population, and even those aren't that big. So lots of room for critters to run around and roam and thrive.
With the Kenai Peninsula being home to such a variety of habitats, one of the most present features are its many mountains, with over 204 peaks altogether, spanning across much of the peninsula. This makes many parts of this region hardly accessible and even covered in ice fields and glaciers. Additionally, many of these mountains shoot up directly by the ocean side of the southern coastline of the peninsula, making the area virtually uninhabited by humans. For example, the small town of Seward is essentially the only outlet to the waters of the Gulf of Alaska on this side of the peninsula, speaking again to the rugged and remote nature of this coastline. For us as humans, this terrain has always been somewhat of a challenge. However, this is not a problem for the creatures that make these mountains and the temperate rainforest that line the shore their homes, which include various large predators and herbivores.
There's a lot of ways that large animals can thrive on the peninsula. Near the rivers, you've got the salmon runs that the bears take advantage of. On the coast, you have all kinds, mussels and seals and all kinds of animals that could potentially be prey there.
Human history on the Kenai Peninsula is long-spanning. The area has long been home to various indigenous groups for many centuries in the past, such as the Sugpiaq, the Central Yupik, and Athabascan groups. There is some debate as to where the name Kenai originates, with one theory suggesting it is with that of the Kenaitze tribe that lived in the area. The first Europeans to settle the Kenai Peninsula were actually the Russians, who primarily clung to the coasts for the peninsula's vast fishing resources. The Kenai Peninsula remained under Russian control until the Alaska Purchase in 1867, when it was sold to the United States along with the rest of Alaska. However, Alaska would not officially become a U.S. state until 1959. To this day, as is the case with various parts of coastal Alaska such as the southeast section, the remnants of the Russian period on the Kenai Peninsula are still visible with the presence of Russian Orthodox churches. There are even small communities of Russian Old Believers that immigrated to Alaska as recently as during the Cold War. Today, the Kenai Peninsula only has a human population of just under 60,000, with the majority of that concentrated on its western side, which is not as mountainous. Officially, we as human beings are the only known upright hominid-like creature found on the Kenai Peninsula. But is this truly the case? For many years now, countless stories of Sasquatch-like creatures have been spun in various parts of the peninsula, with words like Nantinak and the Hairy Man having become associated with areas like the infamous abandoned Port Chatham, also known as Portlock. This film will serve as a journey throughout the Kenai Peninsula into some of its most fascinating Sasquatch stories, which have captivated many for decades. One of the more intriguing stories to come out of the Kenai Peninsula in recent times was by none other than Les Stroud, a Canadian survivalist and filmmaker, well known for his wildly popular Survivorman TV series from the mid to late 2000s. During the filming of his second season of Survivorman, while alone in a remote bay on the rugged southern coastline of the peninsula, Les had an encounter with something he would not forget anytime soon, and has seldom talked about it in great length.
It already felt different when I was there. So what's that mean? Different, It means that for some reason, I legitimately, had that thing where I'm going to say I felt like I was being watched. Now, that didn't surprise me at all because I was in, bear territory and grizzlies. And so I just thought, plus I also am well aware of the fact that when you're in the wilderness, you are always being watched anyway. Whether it's a grasshopper watching you or a cougar, one way or the other, you're always being watched by something. And but it was just the feeling was very strong. And that was right on the very first day of getting dropped off. I just had this, but I just kind of let it go. I don't think I mentioned it at all. And then it was, I can't remember, it was a day or three later. I was filming a scene, making a grass bed of some sorts, and you can actually see me in the show. You can see me stopping and looking off in the distance. And the reason why I was doing that was because I kept hearing some noise off in the distance, and the distance being about maybe 300 yards off into the tree line there. And but I didn't say anything about it. I just kind of let it go. And the reason for that is I was there to film Survivorman. I was not there to be interested or intrigued by anything to do with, Sasquatch or Bigfoot or creatures of any sort other than creatures that fit into the Survivorman storyline, which might be a grizzly or a moose or something like that. And so it was weird, but I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to pay attention to that sound. I wonder, it sounds big, but I'll pay attention to it, you know, and if I act calm and natural, you know, and confident, you know, I don't think anything really is going to come of it. Anything's going to happen. So that's fine. Then I finished shooting my scene. The cameras are over there. They're 40 yards away. They're shut down. And then all of a sudden I just hear this grunting coming from the tree. And for the, you know, for the life of me, it sounded like you would hear a gorilla in the Congo do. Deep bellowing grunt. And yep, I've heard moose grunt and I've heard bears grunt. But this was not that. Plus, it was about 40 feet up in the tree. So it was very strange. And I heard that very loudly 5 times in a row. And around the 5th time, I'm just like, I keep looking over my camera thinking, God, I got to record this. Whatever this is, I got to get this on camera. Even if it's just audio, I got to get it. So but I'm frozen listening to this, not moving. So, you know, and remember, this is Alaska, and I'm talking about something that sounded like a silverback gorilla. So I finally thought, okay, and I jumped to go get the camera to turn it on. And when I did that, whatever was in that tree just crashed out of the forest away from me like a freight train. I mean, it was so fast and just sounded like a freight train just bowling down the forest. You know, and that time of year, had it been a bull moose, it would have been probably much more likely to be more aggressive towards me. Perhaps even a grizzly. They might have been more aggressive. I'm a big proponent of not overly sensationalizing encounters with bears and wildlife. But nonetheless, I know that that's certainly possible. But that's not, you know, that is not what happened. And whatever it was crashed out of that forest like a freight train. I've never heard anything. And I've been around a lot of moose and wolves and bears of all stripes. And never have I ever experienced anything that intimidating and that powerful breaking through the forest. And so that really confused me. You know, I've had other situations in my life, but that one, I just thought, man. And you know, it's that kind of thing where you have absolutely zero proof whatsoever. Everything is anecdotal, but in your mind, you're just like, well, crap. I just think that's what it was. I think that was one of those creatures that everybody calls Bigfoot sort of thing. And that's where I was left with it. I let it go because I was there on a different mission. And I did think, man, what if that was like a Sasquatch? And bear in mind that at this point, I had no desires to do any documentary series on Bigfoot. I had no desires to do anything to do with Bigfoot at all. I was doing my Survivorman thing. So even in that mode, I had said, well, you know what? It might have been, but I don't care. That's not what I'm here for. I need to finish filming my episode. I have, you know, bigger fish to fry sort of thing with what I was doing as Survivorman. And so I really just put it out of my mind. And you'll hear that from a lot of people who have these bizarre experiences. They put it, if they visually recognized it, that's a tough one for them. But a lot of people, just an experience like this that you can't still quite put your finger on. So, you know, you can't prove it to anybody, and you know, super skeptics are just going to laugh at you anyway. Then you put it out of your mind. I had other things to think about, and I put it out of my mind for a couple of years, actually.
When you had that experience, obviously, like you said, you were focused on filming your show. You get done filming, you're getting extracted. Who was the first person you talked to about kind of what happened to you, or who did you kind of bounce ideas off of about what it could have been?
I didn't. Okay. Nothing to say. I mean, maybe over a beer, I might have said something to the field producer about, oh man, I had the weirdest thing happen out there. But you know, it's the kind of, I recognize it as the kind of subject matter that you don't just throw out there, because you know, still to this day, even more so to this day, because it's so much more well known now after the reality shows came out, that you're met with snickers. So yeah, it's not it's not a subject matter I ever bring up. I'll respond to it, but I don't bring it up.
I can personally recall Les telling this very story for the first time publicly on the Opie and Anthony show over a decade ago.
Well, Opie and Anthony, as jokesters as they might be, when they asked me, that was the first time publicly I ever responded and talked about it. And I always answer honestly. So you have to be careful what you ask me in those interview situations. And these are just kind of, like the rock jock sort of genre of jokesters and, radio personalities. And they're, funny guys, good guys having a blast. And so when they ask me, they're asking with a smile and a smirk on their face and, hoping for a bit of kibitzing. And when I come back with, well, actually, and then I just tell the story in all, even more graphic detail than I just did to you, you do leave them a little speechless because they're like, oh, crap. Okay. Didn't know you were going to answer honestly and seriously, but you just gave us something to think about. And that's often the answer. If you're going to, I'll say this a lot is it don't come up to me at a party and throw at me hey dude, do you believe in Bigfoot? Like, if that's the way you're going to approach it, I'm out and the conversation's over. There are more intelligent ways to ask a question about a unique and very interesting phenomenon.
What captivated me at the time about his story was firstly Les's reputation from Survivorman, and the fact that it was not something he was seeking at all. It was a completely random encounter.
Now, have you thought about what possibly it was doing? What was the intent? I don't want to say harass you, but what was the intent? Have you thought about maybe the motivation behind some of the noises you might have heard, or kind of played it through your mind?
Yeah, only and more if I collate that one with any other experiences, I'd say observation. And that's something that doesn't come up much in the world of Sasquatches. What are they doing? Are they malevolent? Are they benevolent? I think observation, curiosity, and I think that's the situation a lot of times. And I'm not talking about, a chance encounter where someone pops up over a hill and there's something standing there. I mean more when you feel them and sense something around you, it's observation. No different than a bear or a cougar or wolves might observe you because you're this weird, pretty inept, gangly creature out in their world. So that would be where I would usually go with what I thought about any kind of interaction, if you will.
Not far from where Les's encounter took place lies the location of one of the most infamous stories in all of Bigfoot history. That would be none other than that of the now abandoned coastal town of Port Chatham, also called Portlock. Located at the geographic tip of the Kenai Peninsula, this area was once settled and was allegedly the site of some kind of violent incidents with Sasquatch-like creatures. Or so the story goes. Larry Beans Baxter likely knows more about the Port Chatham area than most people, having been there on multiple occasions and also having written one of the most decisive books on the topic, titled Abandoned: The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska, which details a holistic view of the events and myths surrounding it, as well as his own personal experiences exploring the area.
So Port Chatham was a small fishing village on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. It was founded in the early 1900s, and by 1950 it was abandoned and basically left to rot. And over the years, the legend has kind of spread throughout the internet and various other means that there was some suspected violent Bigfoot activity, that some people were missing, some people were slaughtered. And I've dug into the subject quite a bit of Port Chatham and done a lot of research on it, and it's not quite the horror story that everybody makes it out to be, although it is an intriguing story. It's certainly not without its place in Bigfoot history. You know, there certainly were sightings there. The natives have certainly had a long history of what they call the Nantinaq, which is their name for it, which is a big hairy creature that they say inhabits the area. And, you know, some people did go missing there, and there were some suspicious deaths. Not the slaughter that the internet would have you believe, but certainly, you know, it's worth looking into. And, you know, the town, the abandonment of the town, it was more of an economic reason than any other. Some people say it was because the highway was built around the time the town was abandoned. I don't believe that's true. There's still other villages across the bay that are still around and thriving today, but it was more of a economic reason, because the family that owned the majority of the industry in the town, their sawmill burned down. And it wasn't insured, and rather than rebuild, they moved on, and that's what killed the town. Not, you know, Bigfoot didn't chase everybody out, but you know, that's a more dramatic, entertaining story, and people like that aspect of it. But again, there certainly was a history of Bigfoot sightings and activity in the area. Along with the abandonment of the town, it just kind of took on a life of its own and grew from there.
While the debate continues about what actually took place at Port Chatham, it has become a topic of discussion for many years. Here's one interesting article by the Anchorage Daily News from April 15th of 1973, which reads as follows, quote, Portlock began its existence sometime after the turn of the century as a cannery town. In 1921, a post office was established there, and for a time, the residents, mostly natives of Russian Aleut extraction, lived in peace with their picturesque mountain and sea setting. Then, sometime in the beginning years of World War II, rumors began to seep along the Kenai Peninsula that things were not right in Portlock. Men from the cannery town would go up into the hills to hunt the Dall sheep and bear, and never return. Worse yet, the stories ran, sometimes their mutilated bodies would be swept down into the lagoon, torn and dismembered in a way that bears could not or would not do. Tales were told of villagers tracking moose over soft ground. They would find giant man-like tracks over 18 inches in length, closing upon those of the moose. The signs of a short struggle where the grass had been matted down, then only the deep tracks of the man-like animal departing toward the high, fog-shrouded mountains with their deep valleys and hidden glaciers." End quote. An example of how widespread the story of Port Chatham became comes from Alaskan outdoorsman Chuk, who grew up hunting and fishing in areas near Port Chatham.
I remember hearing a lot of paranormal stories about across the bay and the head of the bay, but I did not know about Port Chatham until I was fishing with my uncle, and we were right next there. We were in Chrome Bay, just on the other side of Port Chatham there, and as we were trolling for salmon, we went right by there. My uncle pointed at that bay and he said, you know, they moved a whole village in ancient times to the next bay over from here because Bigfoot were killing people. And that just blew my mind. After that, I researched it. Of course, I became kind of a Bigfoot investigator later on and researched it even more. But my uncle told me that as we were fishing, going right by it, and I just thought that was really cool.
When he told you that, I mean, what was your kind of initial reaction?
I was really surprised because you typically hear about, you know, a typical Northern Californian Sasquatch that, you know, scares people off by throwing some rocks. You don't hear about legends of Bigfoot actually killing people. I mean, that was really scary. He said that they moved the whole ancient village one bay over to get away from the creatures. So I was surprised. I think it was the village of English Bay, now called Nanwalik, that they moved. It's got to be the same place.
It's easy to see why people would lean that direction. I mean, if there was ever a perfect storm, if you would, for aggressive Bigfoot protecting resources, Port Chatham would certainly fit the bill. You know, you had the fishing industry going in and catching all the fish, which could possibly, you know, be on the menu for Sasquatch. You had the logging industry going in and cutting down the trees to make the fish traps, so they're destroying the habitat. So, I mean, there's definitely activity there that could conceivably drive an animal to, you know, extreme means of protecting its environment and its resources. So I can see why people would think maybe that's what happened. It doesn't quite fit the typical ghost town story where a town gets built up around a resource, like a mine. They exploit the mine, they take all the ore out of the mine, and then the town dies. You know, when Port Chatham was abandoned, you know, the trees were still, there were still trees there, the fish were still there, so it didn't quite fit the ghost town narrative that you see so often in America, especially in the American West, of exploiting a resource till it's gone, and then the town dies. So I can see, you know, how it didn't quite fit that narrative, how there would be some, people would try to figure out why did this happen?
With the Port Chatham incident having become immortalized in recent years online and in popular culture, even achieving somewhat of an urban legend status, the story gradually became more twisted and contorted as time went on. There has even been an entire reality TV show based around Port Chatham and the idea of a murderous Bigfoot creature, which even to those interested in the Sasquatch topic comes off as disingenuous, scripted, and staged. Amongst the sensationalism of the topic, there have been, however, some serious attempts to document the area around Port Chatham. In 2018, one of the first organized expeditions to the area was conducted by Stephen Major of Extreme Expeditions Northwest, which was covered in a documentary called In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man, which Larry was a part of.
So we were the first ones to go into Port Chatham in 2018, and you know, we certainly weren't the first people to visit Port Chatham since it was abandoned. We weren't the first people to probably even go in there and look for Bigfoot since it was abandoned, but we were the first people to go in there and document our search for Bigfoot in the area. And it was kind of surreal, you know. It was one of those things where nobody's ever going to be able to do that for the first time again. So it was kind of cool being a part of something that was kind of groundbreaking, I guess. And we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, we were half expecting, you know, to get chased out of there. I mean, we really didn't know what to expect. You know, we didn't experience a ton of activity, but there were some things that happened that we certainly, you know, had a hard time explaining. You know, we heard things running around, you know, not too far from us that we couldn't see, you know, making a thumping sound as it ran away, staying just ahead of us. So we heard the sounds of something running away, you know, thumping on the ground just ahead of us as we were walking through the woods. I thought I heard some distant knocks. Of course, we didn't get any of that on audio. Then I got the thermal footage of something. So we were walking kind of in this open area, and Mary Beth, the girl that was with me, she's like, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" And I took out my thermal. I started scanning, and I saw something. It looked like Donkey Kong. It had like a conical head, wide shoulders, kind of tapered down, and its arms were moving up and down like this. And you know, I'm looking at it through the thermal. We're there to look for Bigfoot, and I see something that looks like Bigfoot in a thermal. And what do? I pass it over to one of the other guys. I'm like, "What do you see over there?" And he looked and he goes, "It looks like a dude." And they passed the thermal around a little bit. Finally gets it back to me. I hit record, but by that time it had like started to move away from us, and I got it, but it was just kind of a blob squatch at that point. But I'll never forget that. I'll never be able to explain it. Like, I have no idea what that could have been. It looked like a large man in the middle of the woods where there's nobody, just us. All our team was accounted for, and I don't know. I got the impression he wasn't happy with us.
Aside from that initial expedition, Larry joined on another visit to Port Chatham later on for the filming of a show called The Alaska Triangle, alongside Stephen Major and explorer Adam Davies.
People do talk about it a lot more, the Port Chatham stories, I do believe. I don't know that a lot of people are going there, though, because on some level you have to get permission from the tribe, and then there's different areas. I know once you get past Soldovia, it's hard to get out to, and it's also a very long boat ride. I mean, we're talking longer than 8 hours sometimes to get to some of those areas. So I don't think there's a lot of people visiting there.
All in all, when it comes to the original Port Chatham incident and the truth behind it, that doesn't seem as appealing as the narrative of a violent Sasquatch murder spree having taken place in the area. While it is far more likely that the community was abandoned gradually for economic reasons, as did many other small, now defunct towns and villages around areas of remote coastal Alaska, the story as told in popular culture will continue to spread.
Sorry for the interruption, folks. Just wanted to take a minute to talk to you about the 2024 Small Town Monsters Kickstarter campaign. What exactly is the Kickstarter campaign? Well, it's an annual campaign that we've run since about 2016 or so, before Small Town Monsters was even on YouTube, when it was basically just Seth Breedlove making films. It's obviously expanded a lot since then. But the Kickstarter campaign is basically what allows us to create all the productions you see, whether they're on YouTube, on Amazon, Tubi, all the different platforms. So YouTube series, documentary series, standalone films, podcasts, everything under the Small Town Monsters umbrella is funded by the Kickstarter. What's cool about the Kickstarter campaign is that it allows you, the viewers, to participate and be a part of making all of these productions possible. You can back at a variety of different levels. We have tons of great rewards. You get physical rewards, hoodies, sweatshirts, stickers, all sorts of Small Town Monsters gear and that sort of stuff. There's also Kickstarter exclusive productions and films that you can only view if you're a Kickstarter backer. All the backers get access to films that come out a lot earlier, so you get to see it way earlier than the public release would be. So overall, to kind of wrap it up, this Kickstarter basically just allows us to do what we're doing right now and do it independently and continue to be independent. So if you're so inclined to support us, please consider backing the Kickstarter campaign. There's going to be a link to it in the description of this video. So check that out if you'd like to. And now back to the video.
The small city of Homer, Alaska lies at the far southwestern portion of the Kenai Peninsula and is the closest human-populated area of notable size to Port Chatham. With a human population of under 6,000 people, Homer is called the halibut fishing capital of the world, and is quite literally the end of the road, both in a literal and proverbial sense. Homer is where the interconnected road system that spans across North America ends, on the so-called Homer Spit. Just north of Homer lies Anchor Point, which is officially the westernmost point of the North American highway system. Homer lies at the head of Kachemak Bay, flanked by rugged mountains and glaciers within view, right across the bay. Homer is where outdoorsman Chook grew up, making him very familiar with some of the stranger stories from the area.
A lot of weird stuff in Homer. Kachemak Bay is a hot spot for UFOs, Bigfoot type creatures, paranormal activity. I'll never forget when I was 17 years old, I was working for the Pratt Museum, and this woman did gallery exposition with all of her paintings in the museum, and they were all of giant glowing UFOs coming out of the ocean. For some reason, the head of Kachemak Bay just attracts strangeness. There's been several cults that have lived out there. The only one I remember hearing about was the Barefoot cult And they were these people. Brother Isaiah was the main guy, but they wouldn't wear shoes for a time, and so they were barefoot even in the winter when it's below zero. So it was just kind of bizarre, and there was always stories in town about that cult, but they were based at the head of the bay there. There is the Russian Old Believer. There's several villages by the head of the bay, and they just kind of keep to themselves. They're their own community. A lot of commercial fishermen. They hunt moose out there, and I'm sure they have stories of creatures that they've encountered. But it is a kind of a closed community that keeps to itself. Growing up as a child, there was the story of the witch that lived at the head of the bay, and people have remote cabins. I mean, you have to get to some of these cabins by horseback or four-wheeler once the road ends. And I've heard stories as a child that people have their cabins out there, they're sitting there in their cabin at night, and the witch would come in and stare in their window and just scare them really bad. So I was terrified as a child of that area specifically because of those stories. And across the bay, of course, Port Chatham is where all the stuff happens. What I find really interesting, because I have extensively hunted across Kachemak Bay, in Sadie Cove, Chinapoop Bay, Halibut Cove, Tutka Bay. You wrap around, get closer and closer to Port Chatham there. That whole area is where I hunt. And it's interesting, there are no grizzly bears. Rarely do you see a grizzly bear on that side. It's all black bear. Now, what keeps the grizzly bears from coming over to that side? I think it's the Bigfoot creatures, really. That's what I think, because there's plentiful food. There's salmon streams over there, endless miles and miles of berries as far as the eye can see. Moose, every kind of food a brown bear would just flourish on, and less people on that side. Why do the brown bears not go over there? They stop like it's a barrier that keeps them from going over there, and I think it's those creatures that live out there. It's really interesting. On the town side of Kachemak Bay, I mean, you can drive all the way. They call it the end of the road, most western road you can drive to. Then you can take a boat across the bay. There's a lot of homes and communities out there. But around the peninsula, on the other edge, there's places that you can't even land a boat to get to. It is the most inhospitable territory I've ever seen, especially when you get around to the other side by Port Chatham and Rocky Bay. I took a long boat ride with my uncle where we went through the fjords and we went through that area, and it was literally jagged rocks, cliffs, and trees jutting up, and there was literally no way to stop your boat, anchor. Even if you could get to those cliffs, you can't get to the land. And my uncle pointed that out to me one day when we were going through the fjords, and he said, look at that, no person lives there. You can't even get there. There's no place to land a plane, and there's no place to dock a boat unless you're a mountain climber that can go straight up a cliff wall. I mean, there's no people there because it's very inhospitable. And we were talking about what a perfect place for a Sasquatch to be in this place that man literally cannot get to.
Another place that is located along the same rugged coastline as the location of Les's encounter in Port Chatham is Area A. Those familiar with my documentary films here at Small Town Monsters likely have seen the Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch or the Dark Coast series, and are aware of our multiple expeditions to this location, once in 2022 and again in 2023. Here's a recap for those that might not be familiar with the stories from Area A.
So when it comes to Area A, talked about it quite a bit in some of my videos and our previous expeditions there, but to give sort of a summary, that whole case, back in 2021, I got an email from a gentleman up in Alaska who claimed to have this cabin that he had built in a remote area. They had a lot of interesting activity going on, whether it be rocks being thrown, hearing strange vocalizations, wood knocking type sounds, some of the typical sort of stuff you hear with these other Sasquatch cases. It was intriguing.
It's only when women are out here. It's never, we haven't heard it. It's only when women are out here. It's just a strange thing.
He had a very professional background, former military. So it was really interesting to talk to him. He seemed high caliber in terms of what was going on out there. And he also provided other people for me to speak to. So I spoke to one gentleman who was a retired biologist, I believe, who had some experiences there as well. Just things that were really unusual. I guess unusual in one sense, but not so unusual to people who perhaps know about the whole Sasquatch kind of topic. And obviously I'm cautious whenever I take up one of these cases, but I thought it was interesting enough. In the meantime, I kept in contact with him and he told me about other incidences, and I got to talk to other people involved, such as Larry Beans Baxter, who was an Alaskan investigator that I was already aware of, who I had known. I had had him on a live stream show I was doing, so I knew who he was, and he was involved in this case. So I thought, you know, hey, this is probably something pretty interesting. I got to meet Rob Roy Menzies as well of the Bigfoot Art Gallery, who's become a good friend, and also very interesting stuff that he's had happen out there. And it wasn't actually until a full year later that we ended up going out there, and that's what was covered in the Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch parts 1 and 2. To summarize that first week we went out, this was May of 2022. We go out to the property. Initially, there were 6 of us for that first week. Rob Roy dipped out towards the end of that first week, but for the main time we were there, myself and Eli and Ron and others that were there, we had a few things happen that were interesting. Nothing conclusive, but interesting enough. And a couple of the incidents, of course, that happened were one of them hearing the kind of mystery gunshot sounds that have been described in that area before. When we know there's nobody else out there in that same time that we're there, we can kind of confirm that. We were able to see there's nobody there. I mean, it's a pretty remote area for the most part. We also had an incident by the upper fire pit where we heard what sounded like wood knocks, very clear, going on around us, and then rocks being thrown or some kind of objects being thrown, almost like they were hitting things along the way before they'd crash into the water.
Yeah, the smoke. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You hear that?
Over there, it was, that's the sound of rocks.
Something fell into the water, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we had like branches.
And then the branches, and then more rocks. That's the best I've heard in like 2 summers.
Just roll on that guy, Eli.
Last time they threw like 15 rocks.
And then towards the end of that week, we heard another mystery gunshot. I actually heard it and recorded it. And then I discovered that handprint on the backside of that cabin, which can't say it's Sasquatch, can't say any of this is really Sasquatch, if I'm being purely objective. It was interesting enough that we felt we should at least collect the samples, so we had Larry Beans Baxter come out at a later date and get some of those samples and send that off for testing with Legend Meets Science 2 by Doug Hychek, which is still ongoing as of time of recording of this interview, January of 2024. In regards to the handprint, it was one of those things where I felt it was 50-50 that it was something interesting. We had something that looked human-like. I mean, it wasn't a bear or a moose, in my opinion. It was definitely something looked like it had digits and dermatoglyphics, which mostly found in primates primarily. I'd reached out to some scientists in regards to this. One was Dr. Meldrum. He felt it was probably human. I also reached out to 2 experts in primate dermatoglyphics, and one of them initially kind of thought it was a bear, but then said, no, it actually doesn't look like a bear, but he admitted he hadn't practiced the dermatoglyphic stuff in quite a while. And the other one was somebody he had recommended to me, and he felt it was human because he thought, you know, hard labor is being done out there, maybe someone presses the backside of a cabin, kind of can happen. But he was open to the idea, at least, that there are still mystery creatures like Sasquatch out there, so I thought that was interesting. So all in all, that first week at Area A was intriguing enough that I knew I wanted to go back, and that's ultimately what led into Dark Coast, the 2-week expedition out there where I was joined by Larry Beans Baxter, Damon Irons, my brother, Rebecca Slick of the Olympic Project, the property owner Scott, and then John, friend of his, who kind of helped us run things out there. That second expedition, which was the summer of 2023, we didn't have a lot happen. I mean, basically nothing happened. As you can see in kind of the Dark Coast series, that there wasn't a lot of activity. We were able to survey the environment pretty heavily, but nothing else really happened as opposed to, say, the first expedition that I could even put in the category of potential behavior. Even that's a stretch. I can't say any of that was definitely Sasquatch. It just kind of goes with the trend of what's been reported out there. So it's a very interesting location, Area A. I hope to go back sometime. There have been other instances of things happening out there. Even after we had left into the fall season, there was some stuff that happened. Beans was there for some of that. They heard some kind of stuff. They had possibly a potential sighting, hard to say, but it seems like towards the beginning of the creation of that cabin, there was a lot more kind of spectacular sort of things happening, regular activity, and it sort of has died down over time. And I mean, it could be that area is just so wide-ranging. There's so much habitat out there. I don't know. I mean, these things could move a couple of bays over and not be seen for that part of the year. There's really no way of predicting it. And as Beans always says, if it was predictable, we would have already had an answer. So we're still left searching for answers. But Area A is part of that temperate rainforest, coastal rugged mountains. That's part of that whole area. It's virtually indistinguishable from Port Chatham. And we get questions all the time about those videos. Is this location Port Chatham? It's not. I mean, nearly identical habitat-wise. You could take a picture of Area A and take a picture of Port Chatham. They look geographically similar. Port Chatham is just on that very tip of the Kenai Peninsula. But like the area that Les Stroud had his encounter, same kind of habitat as well. It's these very hard to get to mountains and coastal rainforests that you can only get into via boat. And that's exactly how they would get to Port Chatham. That's some of those communities that are in kind of Homer, Kachemak Bay. On the other side, you can get them by boat or plane. Where Les Stroud had his encounter was also by boat. It's the only way to really get out there practically, and Area A is the same case. So these are primarily isolated areas that have a history of human beings perhaps visiting them, even small communities like Port Chatham existing that either don't anymore for whatever reason, but they're habitat to so many other creatures, whether they be brown bear, moose, or black bear, or mountain goats, or Sitka deer, as we were able to prove in the Dark Coast series that they do live there. So yeah, Area A, I think, is just, to me, a part of that greater Kenai Peninsula kind of habitat and viability that as throughout the interviews we've been able to see, you know, there's a lot of encounters across the Kenai Peninsula in a variety of habitats, but there's so many other examples of wildlife that live in those areas that to me, it's not a stretch to say something like a Sasquatch could exist in an environment like that, hypothetically.
The coastal regions of the peninsula are not the only places where Sasquatch reports have emanated from.
The reports that I've received here on the Kenai Peninsula, they definitely seem to come from more remote areas, other than, you know, the occasional roadside crossing or something like that. I think a lot of that is attributed to, like, if they don't want to be around people, they certainly don't have to be. There's not really any choke points that would force them to be near cities or you know, where people live, and there's plenty of room for them to roam and stay away from people if they want to.
Although much of the Kenai Peninsula is very mountainous and inaccessible, the western side from Homer on upward is comprised mostly of rolling hills and woodlands. Nearly 2 million acres of this area falls under the protection of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge.
So there was a husband and wife. They were kayaking on the lake here, and they were coming around. They went around this bend here, and the woman said she saw what she initially thought was a large man standing on the shore, and he grabbed 2 trees and started shaking them real violently. And as she got a good look at him, she's like, "That's not a person. He was dressed," you know. She thought, "Well, why is he dressed all in black? It's summertime. It's kind of weird." you know, she turns to her husband and she's like, "Do you see that?" He says he sees it. And eventually, you know, the figure like slinks off into the wood line. They actually came back, and she had the husband get on the shore and stand where the figure was standing, and she said he was way smaller than the figure. You know, he was like a 6 foot tall man. So that's an interesting sighting from this location. It's, you know, we're really far in here into the wildlife refuge, and you know, they've got other sightings and vocalizations and strange activity out of this area.
You got this report sent to you?
Yeah. This one was sent directly to me. She actually did really good follow-up. She sent a video of her husband stepping up on the shore and standing in the area, you know, and they're not Bigfoot people, you know. She's like, I've never really been into it, but this was really weird, and I think that's what it was. So yeah, it kind of, I think, maybe changed her her idea of what Bigfoot, whether Bigfoot exists or not. But you know, I've tried to get back in there. You can see it's super thick, really hard for somebody to walk around back in there. But yeah, it's I was kind of surprised that it was actually on this side of the lake where the campground is. I would have bet money she saw it on the other side of the lake, which just, there's just lakes and woods as far as you can see back here behind me. Hundreds of lakes. Some of them, you know, are named, some of them aren't. There's a canoe trail that people can follow, and they camp out at all the little lakes with their canoes and stuff. It's there's just nothing back here. It's just all wild. This area we're at here, I've had several reports given to me from people that have had experiences in this area. I myself experienced something very bizarre. My wife and I were camping here at this very spot, and we were tent camping, and it was probably 3-4 o'clock in the morning, super early in the morning. I was woken up and I heard this sound, this vocalization. I didn't recognize it. It didn't sound like any animal. I couldn't categorize it. It didn't sound canine. It didn't sound feline. It didn't sound like a bear. It was just bizarre. And my wife was with me in the tent, and she heard it too. And I asked her. She grew up here. You know, spent a lot of time camping when she was growing up. She's familiar with a lot of the animals out here. And asked her, you know, what was that? And she said, I don't know. And the closest thing I can describe it to was just a real booming roar. You know, I said I couldn't classify it as like canine, feline, anything like that. The word that comes to my mind when I think about it is monster. As corny as it sounds, it just didn't sound like any animal I ever heard before. It was far enough away from us that I wasn't scared. I wasn't like worried like we had to leave. It was off in the far distance, off in that direction, and back there's nothing. It's just lakes and forests and more lakes and forests until you reach the coast. Yeah, that was probably one of the most bizarre things that we've ever experienced out here, and I was glad that she was with me to give me that affirmation, and the fact that she didn't recognize it and she grew up here. You know, I don't know what it was. I'll probably never know, but it was creepy. Whatever it was scary. It was loud. It was just booming, and it was just a roar. And it did it like 2 or 3 times. You know, it was enough that I heard it, and then, you know, I'm like, "Hey, did you hear that?" "Yeah, I heard it." "What was it?" "I don't know." So we both heard it more than once. But yeah, that was bizarre. And then I've had reports out here. I've had several roadside crossings reported to me, not far from here at all, just down over by the highway here. And one recently, just like back in like December or January of this last winter, a lady said she almost hit a big white thing on the side of the road. Couldn't get a very good description from her other than that, but She just described it as a big white man standing in the road. And had another roadside crossing not too far from where that one occurred. Several years ago, a young couple coming back from an event called the Slush Cup in Girdwood, Alaska. They were driving back south to come home. Saw a large creature on 2 legs, uniform in color, cross the road. And, you know, it was no houses, no structures in the area, no vehicles. And it was spring, still snow on the ground, and they couldn't figure out what it was. They never stopped and looked for tracks. It would have been a great opportunity probably, but they afterwards, it was one of those things after the fact where they're like, I think that was Bigfoot, and you know, then they reported it. But yeah, this area is just it's prime habitat. It's a really good area. Tons of water sources back in here. Lots of forests, lots of room for them to roam. They're protected in here. Not a lot of hunting going on in this area. There's certainly more freshwater sources in an area like this than there is probably at like Area A, where there's more coastline and you know, obviously seawater. But yeah, this is a good area for them. I've definitely had activity here in the past.
Okay, so we're here at a location where Beans has heard audio before. He was telling me about it.
There he is again.
You hear that? Distant gunshot? Didn't sound like a gunshot.
You're not supposed to. I mean, that doesn't mean people don't.
Right.
But you're not supposed to have a fire gun.
Car door slamming?
I mean, the closest thing to us is that canoe site. I mean, maybe somebody dropped a canoe on the ground.
That's what I was thinking. Twice, though? Where is the canoe site? Over there?
Yeah, it's behind, like that way. Yeah.
But it's not on this pond then.
No.
Oh.
So this is actually 2 lakes. There's one here, and then there's another one like right on the other side. But that's not where the canoe launch is either.
Hear it?
I do. It's got to be it. That's pretty far away still.
Yeah, that's not close. It's like a...
I can't say I've ever heard that here before.
Okay, I'm gonna go get my audio recorder. But I don't want to cut.
Give me a hold.
Just grab it. It's rolling. I'm gonna go get my audio recorder. We didn't hear much else while in the area, and overall we couldn't be certain of what we were hearing. Just because you hear a sound you can't readily identify doesn't mean it's automatically something mysterious. It is good to be able to determine what you are hearing, but unfortunately in this case we were not able to. The Kenai Peninsula is a relatively small region, at least when compared to the general size of Alaska. Calling it a microcosm of the state seems to fit well with its exceptionally rugged nature, variety of terrain, and wildlife. It also seems to be a place with some of Alaska's most noticeable Sasquatch legends and encounters, whether it be Port Chatham or something else.
The Kenai Peninsula, it's a great place. You know, they don't call it Alaska's playground for no reason. You know, there's a lot to see and do here, a lot of wildlife to experience. But you know, I think there's a good chance that it's prime Sasquatch environment. I mean, everybody in Alaska either have a story or they know somebody that has a story. There's not too many people out there will just dismiss it outright. Or they'll dismiss it, but then they'll say, well, you know, this person said they saw it and I trust them or something like that. It's few and far between the people out here that just outright dismiss it and say it's not real.
I think it is the food source. There's just so much salmon, berries, game, anything a bear could want is just plentiful on the Kenai Peninsula. So it would make sense, especially in some of these spots that are really hard to get to, that you know, a community of Bigfoot could survive.
It's more of a, you know, a cumulative thing. You know, it's basically all of them together that make me think, you know, the peninsula is a good environment for them, you know, coastally and more inland like we are now. So I can't really just point to one spot and say, this is the spot where you need to go. Guarantee you'll have activity. You know, if it was predictable and repeatable, it would be done with. You know, we wouldn't be out here looking for them now. We would know where they were going to be and what they were going to be doing. I think the peninsula as a whole, as long as you're not in a populated area, I think you probably have a chance, a slim chance, but a chance of experiencing some kind of activity.
Whether or not these stories are real or not is another question, and perhaps not entirely relevant, because regardless if there truly is a hairy man creature on the Kenai Peninsula, the nature of this area seems to inspire those types of tales and likely will continue to do so for some time.
I mean, for me, there's no reason not to be in love with all of Alaska. I adore Alaska. It's big. Big ass nature. It's in your face. I like big in your face nature. I mean, I come from Ontario, which is not like that. I mean, Alaska is a place that I think, you know, anybody who's interested in any kind of travel of any sort should get to see Alaska.